Hello, everyone. Again, as introduced, my name is Chad Cunningham. I'll be your facilitator for this webinar today. I'm going to share my screen. And as we always say, can you see it now? That's the new items that we get. But today we're going to talk about Safeguard Your Congregation Active Shooter Training. And with this, we will have a lot of different questions, I'm sure, is going on, especially after some of the events that's happened over the last couple months, where we're at and how we're there. There are going to be some topics that we may not visit because we're only here for 45 minutes. So it's kind of a high level approach, but we will provide some FAQs at the end also when we have this on our website. To answer some of the questions, we're going to answer as many as we can at the end. But without further ado, I'd like to start our conversation here. So safeguard your congregation and your active shooter training. Plan, assess, and respond. Now, when we talk about statistical meetings, I always like to, we can go into a lot of different statistics, but it's going to take away from kind of how we respond. So I just want to look at this one concept here that in the last 24 years, from 2020 to 2024, this source is through the FBI, we see that there's over 556 events that's happened in the United States. Out of those 556, there has been 19 that involved houses of worship incidents. So that what that means is there's 3% of all active shooter incidents happened at a church. So when these events are happening, what we need to look at and understand is, yes, this is a situation that is kind of high severity but low frequency. So what that means is we don't see a lot of them, but when we do see them, there's high severity in what we see in the outcomes of these types of incidents. So I want us to keep in mind that as we talk through this, this is something that we should have in our emergency operations plan. We should be training on this, but I don't want people to think of this as we're going to interact with this in all of our churches at all the time. We're going to interact with individuals who are not welcomed, that could be threatening in lower aspects from a violent critical incident or an active shooter event, but it is something that we should plan for and we should have in our emergency operations plans for our churches. Again, we could look at other statistical data also. Most of these criteria is from men. Males are predominantly the attackers. Usually it's by a pistol or a handgun. I know we hear a lot about rifles and those kind of items, but most of these are used as a handgun. We did see vehicle and fire being used. So as we start looking at these aspects, it is important for us to understand where we are. As we start to look at this, we need to start to understand how are we going to plan. And planning is the first step in what we need to do. So planning is have a plan, know the plan, and practice the plan. Now, when we look at planning, having a plan is part of really what it is. And it's not just us having the plan, but it's us sharing the plan and making sure everybody in our congregation knows what the plan is, and we need to practice that plan. And the best way to do it is kind of setting it up into 4 different areas. The first area that we want to look at is identifying a planning team, establishing roles and responsibilities. So when we look at developing a plan here, and I think planning is very, very important. Planning and putting together a policy and process is very important to guide how we're going to respond when this type of event happens. So when we look at this, identifying a planning team, establishing roles and responsibilities is important. Who do you have in your team? You want to make sure you have key individuals from inside the congregation and your church. So is it lay people from the congregation is being part of it, the pastor, anyone else from administration and full-time staff that might be part of it? Also, I want you to start thinking also of having individuals from outside the church, such as law enforcement, fire, emergency management, those kind of items and individuals will assist you in providing a good, comprehensive plan for your church. So making sure your team is well-rounded with individuals, not just a core individuals where we think everybody, we can work through this, actually get the subject matter experts in the room with you and have them assist. The second part is have a vulnerability assessment conducted. So that's part of that prepare approach. A vulnerability assessment is really looking to have either local law enforcement or federal government can come in through their the CISA group conducting the Computer Infrastructure Services Agency from CISA. We'll have that at the end, but they can come in and provide vulnerability assessments to see where are the gaps in your safety and security. Is it vegetation outside? Is it door locks? Is it cameras? So they'll provide a very good baseline of where your gaps are in your security to where your plan can identify those and put together on how you can make sure that it's working. The third step is to actually then develop that plan and that security plan. And we will share this out with the recording that we have in a couple weeks, or about a week or so. We'll have a recording out on our website, and you'll be able to look at this and actually link out to a template there that we have provided for you. But in the developing a security plan, you want to go through and put into place how you're going to respond. Now, most templates, as most of us know, it doesn't always fit all of us. It depends on our size, how many people we have, so on and so forth. So as you look at the template, read through the table of contents and say, all right, what works for us in our availability? And this is where it's nice to have a well-rounded team to kind of work through that and develop those areas. Once you have your plan in place, then it is to exercise the plan, which means go through and really pick apart and make sure everybody knows how it works. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about exercising your plan. Okay, so these are the 4 areas of developing a plan for your church and basically having a security. Now, when conducting a vulnerability assessment, we talked about security advisors. I talked about the Region Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA that I talked about. They can come out free of charge and do an assessment of your property. Also, local law enforcement can come in and do an assessment, a security assessment of your property. Again, identifying those gaps, providing resources or recommendations on how you can fix those gaps within the security of your church. If you are, I'm not sure how the grant's going to be funded in the future, but most of the time when the grants were there, you have to have an assessment, a vulnerability assessment of your organization to apply for some of the grants coming out of FEMA and CISA here. So a vulnerability assessment, a security assessment is always very, very good to do because it will provide you information on where your gaps are and how you can focus on those within your policy and processes. The next one is developing an emergency plan. So again, this came out of FEMA's guide to developing high emergency plans for houses of worship. A lot of different things here. Doesn't mean you need to have all section of this basic plan. Again, read through, see what really reflects on where you're at as far as the size of your church or how many people you have involved and how it will assist you. And then it looks at the functional annexes because again, your plan is important because it's just not responding to the active shooter. Because if we recall from the incident that happened in Michigan, that individual used a vehicle and then became an arsonist. So now how do we evacuate not only from that violent individual, but how do we evacuate from fire? Where is our fire exit? So a lot of our emergency responses really overlap with one another. If we practice one, it will help us in another type of situation. So it is very important to make sure that in your emergency operations plans for the church, you have fire operations. How do we evacuate? Where do we go? We have medical. If somebody is injured or having a medical emergency, what is the process? How do we respond? Where does the ambulance come into? Is there an AED? Is people trained on how to use that? So there's a lot of different information that comes across with that type of course. So it's very, very important in here that we look at having all these responses in our emergency operations plan, and we practice those. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of what should be in your plan. So the next part is exercising the plan or train the plan. Different types of exercises that you can use and do. Here's types of exercises: is the seminar, a workshop, drills, and tabletop exercises. So think of a seminar and a workshop is basically providing information to people, the congregants, of what your plan is. Basically having an informational approach, saying this is what our plan is. You read through it so everybody knows what's supposed to happen. Now, a drill is just basically exercising one part of the plan. For instance, easiest way to explain this is a fire drill. So a fire drill, to do a fire drill, is basically exercising how do we remove ourselves from the building in case of a fire. Most of the time, we're not going to have a fire built in there. It's basically understanding and allowing people to know where their exits are and how do they get out from that type of an emergency. Same thing can go with an active shooter response training. So how do we evacuate the building? Same concept as our fire, but we're going to move, and we'll talk about later, a little bit farther away in our evacuation. But how do we get out of the building is important. So I've talked to many churches and congregants, and I always say the best way to do a practice a fire drill or an evacuation drill, however you want to say it, at the end of worship, at the end of the church sermon, instead of everybody just kind of getting up on their own, just kind of having a conversation saying, all right, we're going to basically leave the sanctuary here as if there was an emergency. So we're going to go slow and steady, no panic, but we're just going to leave in different areas than you normally do. This way they can start seeing, well, how long does it take me to go out? And it's kind of a controlled environment there. Instead of trying to bring people back in on different nights, sometimes we can just utilize that during our Sunday services. And then a tabletop exercise. This is a little more involved. This is basically looking at taking a PowerPoint. There's different ways to do it. The easiest way in a tabletop is having a presentation involved that has kind of a scenario involved in it, to where it would have date and time, and you're sitting in the sanctuary, and at 9:05, subject comes in with a weapon and does XYZ. What's your response? Then it allows everybody to kind of talk through the process. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? And then as the conversations are going through the process, there's different stimulus being injected through the PowerPoint on how to respond. Now that road, you're evacuating out. Okay, great. Now you're evacuating and that's blocked. What are you going to do next? How are you going to fix that? Or there's a fire now involved into it. How are you going to remove yourself and get away from the fire also? So a tabletop just pretty much practices from a conversational piece, but with stimulus. So different stimulus being interjected into it on how your plan works and how you're going to respond when these different types, and it's in a very controlled environment. So those are the different types of exercises, but any plan you have, you should always, practice the drills. So practice the different parts where there's movement involved, and then do a tabletop and exercise. What are people thinking? How are they going to respond? And then having different stimulus interjected throughout to get that critical thinking component involved with that. Okay. So moving from the planning stage and the assessment stage into the response stage. And when we look at the response stage, different types of responses that you can do. So there are different programs out there. Again, you heard I was with the ALICE Training Institute, with the ALICE program for a very, very long time. So there's the ALICE, there's Run, Hide, Fight that we'll talk about today as a response. And there's other different ones who are really that come across from these two main ones that we see here. What I tell everybody when they ask me, what program should we use? How should we do it? I always tell them this. It doesn't really matter which one you use, as long as it's an option-based program, which means it doesn't have just one response to fit every circumstance or every situation. That's kind of what we started with way long time ago. And because not not only one way to do something. We always have options. There's always different responses based on the situation and the environment that we have. So response needs to be option based. And again, most programs out there are now option based. And where we look at inside of how the responses come. So whether it's Alice, run, hide, fight, it doesn't matter. They all kind of do the same thing of providing options and how do we respond when that happens. So again, as we talk about today, we're going to talk about run, hide, fight. So again, the terminology is run, hide, fight. I'm going to talk about some different ways to look at these and not take the true definitions of these words. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but think about it from a high level. How do we evacuate and get away? How do we control our environment when we can't get away? And then what do we do to disrupt the person from being accurate and provide us more time to do something, whether it's evacuate or control? So that's really what these three areas that we're going to talk about comes into play. So before we really get into the meat and potatoes of all three of these, I think it's important for us to really discuss the concept of situation awareness and communication. So when we look at situation awareness is basically being aware of what's going on around you. And there's different ways, as we do this as individuals, but as a church and a congregation, how do we look at this from the concepts of our building and our greeters? So situation awareness is having people in place to be aware of who's coming in, their actions, their behavior. May I call it a threat analysis to a degree of how people are coming in. And when we look at our awareness of our property, I always talk about three different zones. We have our parking lot zone, we have our front door zone, and then we have basically the sanctuary zone. And by being aware of what's going on, by having awareness of individuals, if we see that there might be a problem out in the parking lot and we can keep it there, that's better. It gives us more time. If it moves, the next tier is that front door. Again, if we can see that there is a problem in having conversations with individuals, or we see something coming from the parking lot inside, and if we can stop it at that front door of the building and not let it get in, then again, we're reducing and mitigating the possibility of harm. And then the third part is that sanctuary part. Again, if we're there, how are we responding? Where are we looking at? And that gets a little bit more, and I call that kind of more of the red zone, because we're kind of in the moment if somebody gets into that area. But what are we putting in place in those three different areas, from the property to the front door to the sanctuary there? And as we talk about that situation awareness, being alert of what's going on around us, knowing who's who, having conversations with anybody that's new or their behavior looks out of place, and having those conversations. We talk about, again, we don't have time to get into it today, but there's programs out there like the Power of Hello and de-escalation that we have performed workshops at different events before, is understanding how do we talk to people and how are their responses. So we're evaluating how they're doing. But if we do need assistance, communication's that number one priority. Is how do we communicate? How do we communicate with others within the church? So if we do have a situation in the parking lot or in that front door, how am I communicating to people in the sanctuary? How am I communicating in the Sunday school wing? People that are in the youth wing or the Sunday school wing, on how you look at that. So our communication is very, very important. Is it from an overhead communication system? Is it walkie-talkies? Is it by phone only? And these types of communication is very important to understand. How does it work? And will it work effectively in all places? Some people say, well, we have cell phones and we'll use cell phones to call. How is your cellular service within your churches? Some of our churches are very thick walls and the cellular service isn't that good. So that might not be a good option. But we need to think about this prior to the event happening, then figuring it out during the event is happening. So again, testing these, figuring out what works well in our communication, and not having to go out and buy any great concepts of communication equipment, but how do you communicate now, and will it work in the event of an emergency also? But those are just some areas and ways that we need to start thinking and having conversations is how do we communicate within our building and people outside. So again, that leads us into our first slide of the run/evacuate. So run, hide, fight. The run, remove yourself from the danger. And when we're moving away from the threat, we want to look at the exits. So again, think about your church, think about your sanctuary. If you're sitting there, how many exits do you have? You know, many times we just think, well, there's only one exit, the one that I came in. But in some rooms, in some buildings, we have multiple exits that we might not know about. Some churches have exits behind the podium. They can go to the right or the left that leads outside. Some churches have, you know, exits that lead right outside up by the stage area, so the front of the doors. So really understanding where are those exits and where do we move. Now, these types of situations, when we look at the concept of evacuate, is important to understand, and this is where the drills are very, very important, because many of our congregants may have mobility challenges. So when we start talking about mobility challenges, it's very important to understand how efficiently are they to move from where they usually sit to an evacuation or an exit row. Now, sometimes when I've had conversations with churches direct, and we have this topic usually comes up, everybody gets a little upset at me because you might not be able to sit in the same seat you've always sat due to some of your mobility issues in order to get out of an exit safely. And I know, and I'm hoping some of you all are smiling at that, because you know we all get into our seats in our church. I know my seat is in the middle, fourth row, first seat in the aisle. When I sit somewhere else, one, the pastor talks to me after church going, why were you sitting there? You threw me off. And two, it's just a little harder to listen sometimes. So I do understand those challenges. However, we need to look at, if an event happens, how long is it going to take me to get from where I normally sit to an exit? And do I need to switch it around a little bit on where I actually sit? I know some of our churches also have areas for wheelchairs to be able to be part of the seating arrangements, which is great. Where are those stationed? Where are those situated? Do they need to be closer to the exits? So these are all things to start thinking about and looking at as we start putting together our plan and practicing our plan. Also, what happens with it is when we get out, and remember, doors aren't always the avenue of evacuation. Windows can be avenues of evacuation also. We can use windows to get out of a situation also just as well as doors. So remember, if you're going to break a window, the best way to break a window is a corner and then clean it out. The middle of a window is designed to bow with the wind. And again, depending on some of our locations, it could be hurricane style glass, which is even harder to break, but you can break windows by hitting it in the upper right hand corner and cleaning it out and exiting out that way also if need be. Claims always tells me though, make sure when I talk about this, do not break any stained glass because they're nice and we want to do that. But if it's a life and death, we do what we need to do in order to get away. But as we look at this, windows can be another point of evacuation. Now, as we talk about evacuation for fire, we're like fire drills. We all remember when we were in school or we've had those drills. We evacuate to the parking lot because the fire kind of stays within that one area and can't really move outside of the source very well. Well, it changes for this type of event because this type of event has legs and it can move. So we don't want to just go to the parking lot when we evacuate. We need to go somewhere else that's close but still farthest away that we're not in line of sight of that possible attacker. So as we move through, if this is our area here, where do I want to go as a rally point? So is it across the street? Is it in a area through a wood line to a storefront? Is it somewhere else? So wherever you, and everybody's different based on your geographical areas, but you do want to try to find a location for a rally point. Now, some of our churches may be rally points for other locations. I know working with schools, our schools will use churches as a rally point, because you want, anytime you talk about a rally point, you want to make sure it has electric, it has restrooms, it has power, it has phone capabilities, it has capabilities for vehicles. Because again, as we evacuate, we don't want to jump in our cars and try to drive away, because depending on how our parking lots are set up, when law enforcement's trying to come in, you might block them from getting to the scene as quickly as possible. So understanding that we want to move away physically, not utilizing our vehicles, is important also. And where is that rally point going to be? So these are conversations that we do have to have as we're coming through. Now, again, kind of moving back, that goes with evacuate and our communications. That I forgot to say is our communications is very important to call 911 as soon as it's safe, because remember, our event starts right when the attacker's there. Law enforcement doesn't know about it till they get notified. So their time doesn't start till notification. And the quicker we can get them there, the quicker that they can stop the threat. Now, most of the time, the quicker the better. The more time, the more possibility of casualties that we have within the event. So understanding how do we communicate to law enforcement, the safety forces, to get them going as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and understanding how do we do that is very, very important under our communication, because we want them as quickly as possible. All right, so evacuation is the one part. If we can evacuate, we want you to remove yourself. But sometimes we just can't do that. So the second concept, when we can't evacuate, based on there's nowhere for us to go, based on the intruders down the hallway, and we just don't have a safe way to evacuate out, we may have to hide or control your environment by otherwise known as a lockdown or securing in place. So by doing this, start by using the lock if there is one. Some of our doors at our churches have locks, some don't. So this is where we have to look at the next phase. If there's no lock, is to barricade the door with items around your environment. So barricading is very, very important. And the definition of a barricade, very simple, is put as much stuff as you can in front of the door so it provides you time and helps prevent the door from opening. So as you see in the picture there, you see a table across the doorway. If I can get a desk or a table, any of that I can flip on its side and put it against the door, like the frame of the door, then I can tie the handle off to that table. That way, if that door opens outward, because it's important to understand which way our doors open, inward or outward. If that door opens outward and I tie to that table, well, that door is not going to open because that table is keeping it from opening there. But I also stack chairs and anything else in front of that door that I possibly can, because if that door does get open, those items will slow the individual down, allowing us to do something in return. So it gives us time, it gives us a barrier. They're not going to spend a lot of time on these barriers and these barricades. They're going to be quick, and if they can't get in right away, they're going to go somewhere else. You also want to stay out of sight of the doorway and be ready. You don't want to go huddle in a corner. You don't want to hide in a closet or underneath a table. You want to be ready, because if that door does, that individual does come through that door, you want to be up, ready to move in order to do something. We might need to then move to the concept of the fight strategy that Run, Hide, Fight talks about. So try to be ready, kind of as we're standing in that doorway, in that room, we're out of sight, we're controlling it, and we're ready to move if somebody comes through that door that shouldn't be. Okay. And this slide just talks about the different types of doors and how they open. Because again, if this door, let's say here in this middle picture, this door opens outward. Well, if it opens out into a hallway, and I know this is reversed, but if this door would open out into the hallway, and this is our office or our classroom, I want to control this handle. And with the ADA style handles, it's very easy to control with whether it's a rope, a belt, purse strap, any of that. I want to control right over that handle. Now, some of our doors do have these glass panels. Well, I need to barricade that up also to, again, slow down and provide us some time in order to do that. But I would put a table behind, across here, or a desk or anything else I have. And then I would stack chairs or anything else I would have. And then I would stand off to the side, out of the view of the side panel, or even some of our doors have these windows inside the door to where if they look in, they can't see anybody. They might think nobody's there, and they move on to where there's people. So doors opening is very, very important to understand. Do they open in or out? If they open inward towards us, that's a little bit easier to barricade, because now you just put a bunch of heavy stuff in front of it. You can kind of wedge it. If you put stuff under folders or books underneath the door, that helps. When the door opens inward, it's that outward opening door that we have to take a little bit more time and understand. But this would be another concept of practice, or quote unquote drilling, to where you find a classroom and everybody practices on how do you barricade that door? How do you barricade that room to get that muscle memory moving and moving through? Okay. So we've talked about the run or evacuate. We talked about the hide or lockdown or control your environment. The next one is called fight. I like to say control your outcome. I don't like the term fight because it takes a lot of action and responsibility to teach people to fight. And most people don't like that term. So I like to use the concept of control your outcome, because here you have the ability to control what happens. Many times, a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals say, well, fight is the last resort. That means that you've tried everything else, and fight, you just have to. I disagree with that concept, and this is why I disagree with it. Fight might be your first tactic you need to use. Your first strategy might be fight, and then use the other two, based on where you're at when the event happens. So your environment dictates what strategy of the three that you would have to use. Because think of this scenario. You're in the middle of the sanctuary of service. The songs are playing, and all of a sudden, let's back up, not songs, pastor's preaching, and then all of a sudden somebody stands up, brandishes a weapon, and starts yelling and screaming. Now, people on the out, and they're in the middle pews, 8 rows back. So everybody on the outskirts would have time and distance where they could probably evacuate or run. Nobody's really going to use a hide technique, because who wants to barricade themselves in the room with that individual? But the people in rows 7 and maybe 9 and sitting in row 8 on either side or on the one side, they have to do something else. They're not going to be able to hide. Might not be able to run. They might have to control their outcome by distracting and overwhelming the thought process of the intruder in order to get away or to control the person. So we hear a lot of, we've heard some in the past where civilians or participants within this event have stopped the attacker by throwing a chair, by grabbing them, taking them to the ground, so on and so forth. So we've seen that these events happen this way, and I just want to share some information on how this works and what this is really doing. So in the fight, we want to overwhelm the thought process of the intruder. So we'll talk about what that does. We'll distract using the items within your environment. So again, there's no special tools here. It's what do we have in our environment that we can use in order to disrupt their ability to think and make decisions. And then once distracted, you have a choice. All option-based strategies is, do we control the intruder by the 5 appendages of the body, or do we run and evacuate out? So again, we might have to do this in order to do one of our other strategies. So let's take it a little bit further into this concept. Creating a distraction to overwhelm the attacker. So when we look at creating distractions, I want to talk about how does this work? Kind of the why. The first thing I want to talk about is what's called the OODA loop. OODA is an acronym that stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. So when we observe something, it's a thought process as we think through it. This thought process looks at each individual, no matter who you are, you observe what you want to do, you orientate yourself on what it is, how are you going to get there, your distance, you decide on what you want to do, and then you act upon that decision. So I have a cup to the left of me. And if I wanted to pick up the cup to bring it to my face, and you can kind of see where that is, there's a lot of things that happen. I observed to the left to where the cup was. I took my hand and I reached over and I grabbed it. Now I orientated myself on the distance and the location of where it was. I decided to bring it up into in front of me, as you guys see here. Now, my act is I decided to take a drink. Well, my act is taking that drink. Now, how about if somebody comes into my office and yells and screams at me that they have a problem and I need to fix it? Am I going to be able to finish the act of taking a drink, or I'd probably put it down and respond to that individual? We'll take it to where we're talking about now. If the action is to pull the trigger on the weapon, I want them not to do that. So how do I keep that decision from happening? Well, I provide stimulus to their person. And that stimulus is whatever's coming at them. And I want to overwhelm the thought process of the brain. Science shows us that we cannot do two things at one time. Some of you are saying, yes, Chad, I can do two things at one time. I can multitask. Well, what that means is your brain functions very, very quickly. So the synapses fires quickly and you can process information quicker. Not all of us have that. So it's very difficult by science. You cannot do two things at one time, which means that if I'm trying to protect myself and pull a trigger at the same time, I'm going to have to do one or the other. So how do I overwhelm that thought process is making sure I go straight to the brain. And that pathway to the brain is through the eyes. So I'm going to take items in my environment and distract them either by throwing, shoving, whatever the case may be, into the pathway of the visualization of the optic nerve. And therefore, when something comes at me, think of it this way. If you ever had anybody come at you or put their hand in your face real quick, and probably just me doing that, some of you step back a little bit. Why? Because the human concept of self-preservation overtakes everything else. So if I have things coming at me, especially at my face, I'm going to protect myself. Well, if I have a tool in my hand, a weapon, and I'm protecting, well, that weapon is high. It's not being pointed in a direction that could cause harm. So even if the act would happen, it's in a safe area and not causing that harm. So understanding disrupting that OODA loop, that thought process, because we gain time. Every time a stimulus comes into the pathway, they have to reset. And we can gain seconds, right, by each one. Because every time it resets, you have to go all the way to observe, go all the way through that process again. So that is very, very important. The other three items we're going to take a little bit more advanced, but movement and distance decreases the attacker's ability to be accurate. So we talk about movement and evacuation. How do we move? The quicker we can move away, we can go side to side, depending on our location. If we're close to the attacker, we might want to do that zigzag. If I have time and distance, I might not need to do the zigzag because he's not right there. So I just want to move as quickly as I possibly can. But we'll show you how movement does help us. And then the thought process with lots of stimulus. I'm going to demonstrate how stimulus kind of overruns the thought process there. And then we gain time to either evacuate or control. So by doing these, we get that time, and that's what we want. We're trying to gain back control, and we do that by the time. So the first thing I want to do a couple exercises with y'all. And I know sometimes being on Zoom to kind of do some of this can be challenging, but we're going to try this because we got to live on the edge. So what we're going to do in this exercise, what I'd like everybody to do is take your finger, and it doesn't matter which one, what hand, whichever one you want. And I want you to kind of put it towards the circle. I want you to put the middle of your index finger in the middle of that circle that's on the screen. When I count to 3, I'm going to press, and that circle is going to start moving. I want you to follow the movement, and I want you to keep your finger in the middle of that circle. Okay? All right, here we go. Everybody got their fingers up in the middle on 3, 2, 1, Follow the circle, please. All right. Now, normally when we can see each other, I get a lot of people laughing. I got a lot of people shaking their heads because they can't really follow through. If I did a poll here, I'd say, all right, how many people followed it all the way through? That number is going to be very, very low, if not zero, because the faster it moved, the further we get behind. And I'm sure some of you, when you were following it, you started seeing a tail at the end of the circle. Well, there's no tail, still the circle. But what happens is our optic nerve takes, think of it like a camera, it takes pictures as it moves. Well, you were seeing that tail because you were behind it that much. And if you really looked at where your finger was to the dot or the circle, you were actually behind it 1 or 2 viewpoints of the circle. So that's how our optic nerves work. So again, if we can add movement to our bag of tricks in this event, it allows us to increase his ability to use his tool and decreases or mitigates possibly our casualties when we look at this. So movement is very, very important. All right, so let's talk another one about stimulus, overstimulating, stimulating, because I know some of you are still thinking, Chad, I can multitask. I can do 2 things at one time. But let's check this out. So in this exercise, there is going to be a colored dot that shows up on screen. I want you to count how many times does the colored dot show up on the screen. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right, so now we're even going to try to get really technical here, and we're going to put out a poll to see how y'all did. So here's your answer. How many green dots did you see? So if you put in the number in your answer, I just need 3 people. I know there's over 300 on here, but a couple people put in the question Q&A chat how many you think you saw. Not all 300, please. You'll overwhelm our QA. But what do we think? 11. All right, I see some. 11, 11, 11, 10, 10, 11, 11, 11, 11. Great. Excellent. No more. We got it. 11. Great job, y'all. Thank you. So 11 dots, green dots. All right, great. That was so good. I think you guys can upgrade. We're going to take it to the next level. So in this exercise, I want you to count the number of green dots and count the number of yellow dots, I believe. But there's 2 different colors. I want you to count how many green, how many yellow that shows up on screen. 2 separate entities, not all together. How many green, how many yellow? All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right. So how did we do? A couple people want to answer the Q&A. That'd be great. See where we're at. We'll try the poll again, or you can throw the Q&A. I have one person go, nope, didn't happen, right? How many? Probably most of you started answering it, and then you found that you lost track. So you either stopped, started laughing. Again, these are all things that I've used in the past and seen where we're at. Because why? Our brain cannot do 2 things at one time. So anybody get the number? Let me see. 11 green, 12 yellow. That's pretty good. I have no idea. Question mark. Got totally lost. Stopped. 20 each. All right. So all in all, it was 11 and 11. So if anybody got 11 and 11, you did well. Some of you got close. Great job. So my question is, did anybody see the owl? So if you saw the owl, that means use my fingers. Okay, yep. Some of you saw the owl. Good. That means I got to speed that owl up. Too many of you saw it. But many times it just goes back to that concept is when you're focused on one thing, it's hard to see other items going on. So the more we can let them focus on other things, like the stimulus of us using environmental tools, the better off we can be in this environment. So speaking of environmental tools, here's just some concepts here that we can look at. You know, we see chairs. We have those. Maybe a coffee pot, coffee cups, fire extinguisher. Fire extinguisher can be used as a blunt object, or you can use the CO2 involved, but remember, it affects us as well as it would the attacker when utilizing that. But again, what do we have within our environment that we can use? And you see a lot here. Now, some of you are saying, well, Chad, that looks like an office setting. All right, so what do we see in these two pictures? What can we use here within our congregations and in our churches, right? We have books, we have ornate items that maybe we can use. We have podiums, we have whatever we brought with us to church that day. We have many different things that we can use. If this is one of our offices, or maybe we had to secure in here, what do we have? We have filing cabinets, we have chairs, we have papers. Again, even papers being thrown, that's a lot of stimulus coming at them at one time. So really understanding how that works is very, very important. So we have these different things that we can use in order to overwhelm. Now, once we decide to overwhelm or distract, we need to make a decision very much more than just saying, hey, that actually worked. Once we distract, we got to make a decision. So having that plan kind of in place and practicing is important, because now what do? Do we run because we have time and distance from it, which is great, or do we need to control the 5 appendages? Now, again, I'm not saying that you should control the person or grab the person. If you can get away, you can get away. But I have a lot of conversations with individuals saying, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab them and I'm going to do this. And again, this just isn't something that we kind of talk about. So I like to just briefly describe the head, 2 arms, 2 legs. We have 5 appendages. We want to control those appendages to control the body. The first appendages you're probably going to try to grab is the arms. And how do we look at grabbing those? Don't just grab it with your hands. You need to hug it. So I always say this is the hug technique, because think about it. If you hug something, so I'm going to adjust my camera here a little bit. If I hug it and I have an arm in the middle of it, I have more control because now I hug this arm, I grab it, I hug it. If it has a weapon in it, it's off to the side, so it's not pointed, it's pointed downward, but then I can drop my body weight. So now with my full body weight going down, I can control them easier. And now I have 2, so now I have 1 on each side, hugging it, grabbing it, and taking it to the ground. Then I'm going to grab the legs. I can grab 1, I can grab 2, depending on what's going on. And now they can't move anywhere, and normally they fall. If you get them on the ground, you want to control the head. If you control the head, the body will follow. And by controlling the head, you can just grab 2 hands, almost like you're doing CPR without the compressions, but you press all your body weight down around the ear of the head to keep them down on the ground until help arrives. So if you're going to be that person, that's a way to do it in a quasi-safe manner. But we want to control those appendages in order to do that in a safe manner. So again, are there rules? No, there are no rules when this event happens. This is a life and death situation. Rules kind of go out the door. You do whatever you need to do in order to survive the encounter, and whatever you choose to do is the right thing to do. There is no right or wrong or saying I should have done this. Whatever you do in the moment is the right thing to do. Okay. So those are the 3 strategies: run, hide, fight, involved in a violent critical incident or an active shooter event. Again, very high level, and I want to leave enough time, but kind of looking at how you want to look at in these aspects. Following this is not a full, man, I'm trained, I'm ready to rock and roll. Please do not use this training as that. This is enough to give you thought process on what do we need to do to better prepare? What other things do we need to look at? So here's other links for resources to look at going through. My suggestion is getting with local law enforcement or other entities within your area who can provide you with face-to-face active shooter response training to look at that. Some local police departments, local sheriff's office may do that. There might be some third parties in your area. It all varies per state and location, but that would be my suggestion there with you there also. But all these are very good actions to put into play. Remember, have a plan in place, have a plan, know the plan, practice the plan, have responses ready. When you're responding, is it a run, hide, fight? How does that work? Practice those physical activities, because again, we're all in different levels of physical abilities, and how do those help us? Now, some I'm sure are saying, well, we have people with wheelchairs and canes and so on and so forth. Those are good distractionary devices, right? Those can be used very, very well also. Just because they have them doesn't mean it's a detriment. They actually do work actually pretty well in that concept of safety and or distraction. Movement might be our challenge that we need to work through, and that's where drills come into play. Okay. So with that, we'll take some questions. Again, we have 5 minutes or so of questions, and we'll try to answer some. I know my colleagues in the back have been trying to answer these as we go on some of these. I will guarantee I'm not going to be able to get to all of your questions, but what we will do is we will print these questions out when they're in here, and we will answer them and put them as an FAQ with the recording here in the next week or so. So looking at it, so I think we talked about the mobility issues, including several walkers, wheelchairs. So again, hopefully you caught that there, that, you know, practicing that and understanding where they're sitting and how close the exits are, or where that will be beneficial in that. And having them as part of the planning process is important also. Having congregants who sit in there day to day in there is very, very important there. Somebody talks about emergency communication. So there is a RAVE program. Schools use it. You can use any of those types of technology out there. If you have the ability to get a technology like that, RAVE is great in order to get information out to everyone that's there. Dial my calls is good. I don't know that one, but I'm figuring that's you dial it and it goes out to all the phones. Just make sure that there's people at the phones. So what's my quickest way to get information out there? Here's one question. How much should the pastor be involved in the execution of the safety plan, i.e. calling 911, helping people outside, so on and so forth? They need to be involved as far as knowing what the actions are. But remember, the pastor, if it's happening on a Sunday during service, they're up front and kind of people are looking to them to coordinate and to give direction. So it's important to have, my suggestion would be, they're not leading everything. We have other people, whether it's the trustees, the deacons, or I call, at my church, we call them first impressionists. So the people who are greeters maybe sit in the back, other people who have authority to make those. And really call 911, that's everybody. Everybody calls 911. The more that, the merrier in that. Don't just have 1 or 2, because if something happens and those 2 don't do it, just if everybody sees it, everybody can call 911 when that's there. But I think multiple people need to have ability to run the emergency plan and not just the pastor. But they're, again, given direction and looking at how they look at that. When we look at the kids, that's another concept. You know, where are the kids there? How much do we prepare kids? A lot of students are already getting it. They're already in school. All schools are doing some type of active shooter training. So they're probably more prepared than most of our parents are, as far as that's concerned. And we need to understand what is our layout of our building with our youth. So do we have somebody walking around the youth? How do we communicate with the youth? Are they all in the same room? Are they in different rooms? How do we look at making sure that's a priority when the event happens? Is very important, but don't be surprised. The kids probably know more than most of us on this call based on what they get trained in their school districts. How do you determine where your rally point should be? Is this something we decide with law enforcement? I would agree, yes. Talk with your law enforcement. And again, you just want to look at, it's not right next door, so there's space and distance to look at it, and it has cover. All right, so you can go inside in case it's inclement weather. It has bathroom facilities, places for water, phone, Wi-Fi, those kind of aspects are all part of it. And maybe wherever you decide to do that, you have kind of a go concept storage bucket there with a first aid and some bottled waters and different things like that that you can store at that location there. So it's very, very important. And do you ever state that someone needs to call the police? I think you always say call 911. It should be understood that if there's an emergency, we always call 911 and get that, get them rolling as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I'm going to take one more. All right, here's one that deals with insurance and EOPs. So is there an incentive for having an EOP or emergency operations plan in place, or other items discussed here, insurance discounts or rebates? Many times when we look at this, it just helps knowing that you're doing something and preparing for an emergency helps always. All right. So are there discounts or rebates? That's going to be dependent on what's going on and where it's at. But for me personally, I think an EOP should be part of our regular policies as a base. Now, this is just Chad talking, not an insurance base, but when we look at, we talk about sexual misconduct liability policies, we talk about financial controls policies, facility use agreement policies, but we really need to look at also emergency operations, because all this comes under of having a safe environment for our congregants in our church. So it's just, to me, it's just a base that should be one of our bases there. But, and I'm sure though, the more you have, the better you look for that underwriter who is looking at your account there. So the more you have, the better you appear on paper, right? On what that is. Okay. So again, I'm sorry, we're at time. We're actually 2 minutes over. I want to be very cognizant of everybody's time and what we have here. We will take these. I will answer them as quickly as I can there. Also, usually I have our number here, but yes. So here is our contact information, your loss control team. Again, you saw Monroe Moore in the introduction, did a great job. Thank you, Monroe. And my information's here. Send us an email. If you want to talk more, love to talk more with you one-on-one and where we're at there. But I appreciate everybody's time. If you need anything from us, please let us know. We're here to help. So thank you all very, very much. Have a great rest of the week. God bless.